So today's been great because there's been a lot of talk about COVID, and one of the underlying themes that's come through for me is how adaptable we have to be. And it's not just COVID, it's geopolitical challenges, and we really have to adapt pretty quickly. And as a Kiwi, I'm pretty happy because I think our number 8 wire, our ingenuity, our nimbleness has really set us up very well to adapt in this environment. But having spent some time in China, studying China, eating, breathing, touching China, I think it's really opened my eyes up to New Zealand is not, in every case, as nimble as we would expect, particularly relative to our friends over in Shanghai and Shenzhen and all these other Chinese cities. So to kick off, I think 2 of brands that I really love in the food and beverage category, both have disrupted the grocery trade, one being Fresh Hippo and the other being My Food Bag. And there's something about Fresh Hippo, or Hema as many of you know it, Alibaba's new retail, which I'm sure you'll be hearing about in the next session. They hit COVID, and much like Dan from Zespri said, they had nothing else to go on. No one had seen COVID coming, it hit them 2 days before everyone was on holiday. And they had to adapt incredibly quickly. So they had challenges much like the rest of the world, but it was all uncharted trailblazing. So to kick off, they had that ability to communicate. They had to reassure customers in this very uncertain time. And they made 3 promises. The first being they are going to keep open. And there was a lot of businesses that closed and a lot of uncertainty around that. Second was they weren't going to raise their prices. And that happened with a lot of food suppliers in China. They just pushed up the prices because they could. And they promised not to. And the third was they would do their darn best to try and keep supplies coming in to their stores and really make sure there were things on the shelves. And they communicated that and in saying that did a very good job. The next is... Sorry, my eyesight's not that great. I can't see that screen too well. But obviously, like everywhere, hospitality really took a hit. And they had a massive spike in people wanting to buy food and beverage online, and no one to fill the boxes, no one to supply the boxes, no one to deliver it. So they got everyone, worked very quickly and got all these unemployed hospitality workers to do so. And as a result, could really meet those promises that they made. Thirdly was they negotiated priority terms. So they're starting to get a bit of clout. On the scale of China, they're quite small still, but they have some very good relationships with suppliers, and they negotiated and made sure that they were getting the supplies they needed to provide these consumers. And as a result, they could deliver, but again, a lot of the delivery people, the migrant workers, had gone home for Chinese New Year, so they had to really get smart about it. And they created drop-off areas and apartment complexes that would really help serve the people that they could go and collect it. They used buses that were empty. They had to provide for emergency services, but these buses are empty, so they were delivering cartons of food in them. So really good adaptability. Let's cross over to NZ a couple of months later, and you had a great brand called My Food Bag that unfortunately there were some people in the deep south that didn't get it. I guess there were some real challenges for New Zealand and things like social distancing and the warehouses and things. They couldn't get supplies to people in Dunedin and Invercargill, other places down south. A lot of these people didn't even know. They were waiting there for their food and beverage to be delivered and it didn't come. The other one is no new customers. And that is, for me, I think a real missed opportunity. That a challenge with a disrupting brand like My Food Bag is it's quite a fundamental shift in the way we cook. So the biggest barrier to getting new consumers in is creating habit and really crossing over that and getting people to actually try it. They had a golden opportunity to get new people on board, much like Hema did, Fresh Hippo did. But I think they didn't take that. They could have got, as we talk about in China, the 997 or 996, 997. People, if they were in China, they would have got people working around the clock, working in the middle of the night, even if it meant running at a loss. They're hungry for it. They really want to make sure they seize that opportunity, the crisis being the opportunity. They would have got it. You look at Fresh Hippo, Humar, they now have incredible loyalty. They really met people's needs during this difficult time, and they in a really emotional time too. And as a result, they've been rewarded with loyalty. Their new customers shot up, their new sales have shot up, and that hasn't dropped since COVID. So a real opportunity that they did. And I think what that represents is just how adaptable and nimble Chinese businesses are. And sometimes New Zealand businesses probably aren't so much. Now, this is a stat that is not COVID. This was long before COVID, and it feels like a lifetime ago. But in 2017, 97% of FMCG growth in China came from local brands. And everyone blamed this rising nationalism, which has obviously accelerated even more with COVID, but it's not. It's a lot about the way Chinese businesses operate. It does contribute to it, but systematically Chinese businesses are set up to adapt to this market that is so dynamic and like nothing we've ever seen before. So if you look at the global phenomenon of the Football World Cup back in Russia in 2018, that sponsors board, there's probably a few brands you haven't heard of. The ones with the red rings around them, Chinese brands. So 4 major sponsors of the World Cup were Chinese, as many as the Americans in this truly global tournament. You may be familiar with Mengniu, the dairy brand sponsoring. Part of that was to build credibility in their home market. Chinese see these brands on the global platform. They see that as real credibility building. But part of that really represents just how Chinese brands are spreading their wings. They've got an awful lot of capital, an awful lot of expertise from their domestic markets, and now they're going abroad into other markets. And a lot of those markets are markets we're also targeting. Southeast Asia, South Asia. A lot of these markets, developing markets, are there for the taking, and Chinese brands are very much all over them. So if you look at Fortune 500 companies, last year was the first time, and that's mainland China. You add Greater China, it goes up to 133 versus 121 in China. Back in 2000, it was 9. So it just shows how these brands are rising. So as a New Zealand brand exporting, you need to understand your Chinese consumers, but you also need to understand your Chinese competitors. Not just for China, but these guys are going everywhere now. It's made a little bit harder by the guys like Trump that have really increased animosity against Chinese brands. But many of these brands are really ramping it up and really doing very, very well as a result. So they talk about China years, and they say about what happens in 1 year in China takes 7 years everywhere else. And I think that really represents just how fast China changes. As a result, the businesses, the people that run the businesses, they've grown up in this environment that is constantly changing very rapidly. They live and breathe change. And so for them, it's second nature. So when it comes to making decisions, they can make it really, really quickly. So as a business, I'm coming in there and I'm making decisions. Particularly as a Chinese business, I don't have that many gates to make decisions. You've got a lot of businesses are very run by the CEO who makes an awful lot of decisions versus Western New Zealand businesses, which is more collective, more done at mid-manager level. But you've got one guy in many companies and girl in many companies that will make that decision and do it really rapidly. You don't have to go via Auckland or Sydney or London or New York, Paris, whatever. You can make it there and then very, very quickly. So for something like COVID, it really enables you to adapt. It's also a different mindset. You get businesses in China are focused on market growth, customer acquisition. They're about revenue, and they have very much an appetite for risk. Revenue in the West often becomes profit. It's not so much about just getting money in. We actually have to be sustainable and make profit. We're all about efficiencies and about scale, and there's a natural aversion to risk. So 2 quite different ways that our businesses operate versus Chinese businesses, and obviously relevant in China, but increasingly more other places. So we've heard today a little bit about digital, and obviously not just in China, but everywhere. COVID has accelerated the uptake of digital. And there's a lot of Kiwi brands are on e-commerce, and that's great. E-commerce has been with us for many years, and we've all done a good job of adapting to it. Social commerce, on the other hand, is phenomenal. Something that happened with COVID was the only way most people could communicate when they were first locked in was through social media. And that for them was a really their touch point that they communicated. That evolved into more shopping and buying and brand building, etc. So if you look at WeChat mini programs, in this last year, they doubled in value to 1.6 trillion RMB. So that's about $340 billion just on WeChat social commerce. That's more than 10 times China and New Zealand trade. So real numbers. But if you look at who's actually doing it well, the Chinese brands are less than 5% of the top WeChat Mini 50 WeChat Mini program accounts are foreign. So again, they've really jumped on it. There's things like short video, which has almost 900 million users and almost dominated. We do audits all the time at China Skinny into who's doing well, and there's very few foreign brands that come up. All sorts, I could go on all day about it, but from a marketing perspective, Chinese are very nimble, they're very adaptive to all these crazy new trends that are constantly evolving. Quicker to market. We were doing some studies for one of the big global FMCG brands, and they wanted to understand what is it that's keeping us from competing with these incredibly dynamic companies. Something we found was just how quick from ideation through to selling on a screen or selling on a shelf these Chinese companies are. We spoke to a Shanghai-based skincare company, and they produced a mask from coming up with the idea to selling it within 3 days. We spoke to a foreign shampoo brand that had created a made-for-China shampoo product. 3 years to create a new product. And as anyone in the room I'm sure knows, anything in China that takes 3 years, it's quite irrelevant by the time it actually comes. And they're creating many more products, SKUs, etc. So really, really important to adapt quickly, because these trends come and go very quickly in China. But part of the SKUs, and we spoke to GSK, just the oral care division. In Europe, they have 200 different SKUs. In China, they had 1,500. So they have different ones for all these different demographics, these different lifestyles, different geographies, different age groups, different family stages, different occasions, all these things that Richard was just talking about. They've got a product to serve all that. Something about Chinese consumers, they don't want the same stuff that 1.4 billion other consumers are using. They want something specifically for them. They want it to be special for them, to their personal needs and their personalities, their tribes. So a really good job of these Chinese brands are doing that through product development, through packaging, through marketing, through positioning, etc. And then it's just great having this awesome marketing, this awesome product development and structure to make decisions quickly, but you also need to have pretty good sales guys on the ground. And something that we've seen is the structure, the systematic way that a lot of Chinese businesses are set up to sell products is they give the sales guys a lot more autonomy. You have, in Mangyo, I like to use this example, they use what's called amoeba as their sales structure. And so they'll get, instead of having this regional or nationwide sales strategy and teams all reporting in, they have very small teams that are very autonomous. They may have 3, they may have 4 or 5 stores in their little neighbourhood that they are responsible for. And they have a lot of flexibility around price, around relationships, around promotions, and are rewarded or remunerated in quite reflective of the amount of time and effort they put in and the amount of flexibility they have. So these guys work really hard as a result. You'll get guys sleeping in their cars just to make sure that they can work as many hours as they can to sell things. You look at a Western company, and we've evaluated sales models and sales remuneration. The average dairy brand was getting about 5,000 RMB a month. This was a couple of years ago. At Mangyol, the average was getting about 10,000. So they're just getting a lot more because they have the power to do so. As a result, they attract the best and brightest, most ambitious people that want to be in a company that makes decisions quickly. They might want people to be in a company that's more China, but ultimately they want to work in a company that they can make a difference and they're not having to wait for these long decisions that they can't really impact. So that's kind of, I guess, the big thing for me is really not just looking at consumers and how they behave, but also looking at businesses and the way they behave in China, because they're not just relevant for China, but increasingly relevant for business exports globally now.
Thanks a lot there, Mark. And I feel like our roving mic people haven't had a lot of work to do today. So it'd be great if we have any questions from the floor that they can go to. I think that'd be great.
Much nicer.
But I did want to begin by asking you, looking at a lot of our food and beverage companies, a lot of them have a lot of science behind their brands, particularly if you look at dairy or sheep milk, the blackcurrant industry. Is there a space, given the rising nationalism in terms of purchasing over in China, is there a place for using science to put our brands ahead over there?
Yeah, science. Sorry, I don't. Looking good. Science is a tough one because there's all sorts of rules and regulations about how we promote it and things. Cross borders a little bit easier because we don't have as many restrictions, but it is tough. And we also need to look at how Chinese, a lot of their science is they're investing an awful lot in R&D, more per capita than almost any country. And so it's really important that we don't just think we have this monopoly on science. But I think just playing this pure New Zealand positioning is less and less going to swing customers our way. So if we can have a difference between tying in science, but also making it relevant for Chinese consumers, making sure that science is what they want, what they need, what their true needs are, I think there's a real opportunity there.
And I guess given that need for rapid time to market, it can make, I guess, testing science claims a bit of a challenge, I guess.
Yeah, and not just that rapid, but also getting the approvals, the required approvals when you have new formulations, etc. can be tough. Whereas you look at the way a lot of Chinese brands do it, they'll just throw the spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. Right. And they'll, in many cases, they'll just have a slight tweak in another product. They might have a slightly different bit of ingredients or even just a new package and some new claims, and that'll be a completely different positioning and aiming at different customers. So in many cases, their product development isn't actually that. Right. There isn't much gone into it.
Right. Do we have anyone from the floor that would like to ask a question? We have got questions.
Post-lunch crowd, it's tough. But what's the world come to? If you're not on an app, you can't ask a question.
Yeah. I'll start with this question up here. Could you share your view, an insight into the challenges or pain points that young women are facing in Shanghai right now? How could New Zealand business help to solve that?
Wow, that's profound. Something that I've been really quite blown away with, and I was completely ignorant before I moved to Beijing originally, and it was just how impressive Chinese women are. If you look at the Politburo and all the guys in Beijing, it's just about all males. But the next level down, females run the country. They have a much higher percentage of education or tertiary education. If you look at free and independent travellers, they account for around 60% of the travellers. They're incredibly confident, incredibly assertive, and they are really doing well. I think their challenges aren't things like, well, there are challenges around things like unfair opportunities and things, but overall, a lot of professional women are doing very well. Their challenges are finding a mate that lives up to their standard, not only like is not playing computer games and spending too much time doing whatever, but also their family, meets their family from a financial equity standpoint and stuff. So it's about, and some brands have done really well. SK2 is one that springs to mind about the leftover woman, just all these women that have not found a partner and just how it doesn't really matter. You can still be yourself, still be very successful, and they've really connected at a good level. Nike, the company we work with, has done a really good job as well of showing all these aspirational sportswomen, and a lot of women in China, I think they're some of their best athletes. You look at their rugby team, they're actually contenders. You look at UFC, you look at Linar at tennis, a lot of the golfers, all that kind of stuff are women. So there's a lot of role models to use, but it's a case of doing it very well rather than kind of quite surface level token woman type conversation.
Great answer to a challenging question there. Could we get the timer up on the screen just so I know how much time we've got left on the session? I liked this question that's come in. Do you see many products being sold based on environmental attributes?
I wish I saw more. There's all this talk about the environment, and China's enforcing all this green sustainability messaging, and 30% of the world's EVs are in China. And you only need to look outside in China to realise how important the environment is and looking after it. But something that we've constantly found is there's a lot of lip service around the environment from consumers. There's still this expectation that Beijing should be doing it. I'm one of 1.4 billion people. What can I do? How can I make a difference? It should be Beijing that's handling it. But fortunately, it is slowly changing, and there is more accountability, particularly with the young consumers. They are definitely more aware, and their behaviour would reflect the importance of sustainability, etc. But relative even to New Zealand, it's still got an awful long way to go. This question here is an interesting one. Should your typical Kiwi SME even bother with brand building? Why not go down a pragmatic path of co-marketing with retailers or house brands? It's a good question, and I think a lot of people come to China and think that they can kind of get $1 for every Chinese person type thing, but there are some really good examples of brands that have done a great job of really reaching Chinese consumers. I think the key is to not just try and sell in China. It's really choosing a niche. Very few New Zealand companies can really get any scale, but if you can choose a niche that may be a certain geography or a very small tribe, that's a really good opportunity to reach those consumers by just focusing in. And my favourite is Pix peanut butter, and the reason I love that is we were doing analysis a couple of years ago about peanut butter brands or spread in general, and Pix did this phenomenal job that they are the top selling by value, not by volume by any stretch, but by value, the important stuff, seller online in China. And the thing I love about that is it's the antithesis of how most New Zealand sells. We export all these commodities over abroad, and then someone else adds value, whereas Pix, although there's talk they're growing a few peanuts in Northland, they bring in, we don't grow that many peanuts here, but they manage to bring them in, probably put that clean New Zealand transparent stamp on things and charge an awful lot for a bit of just peanuts with a bit of salt in a jar. So I think that's the kind of thing that we can use as a role model, that it really does emphasise the power of that New Zealand pure brand, but it's making sure that you get something in that brand that really does resonate with Chinese.
Yeah, that's a great example. I'm excited to say that we have a question from the floor, so we'll go down
there. Go, Pat.
G'day, mate. Is it on or off? I could just shout.
Yeah.
Oh, this is more fun. Hey, I thought of a really easy question, but then I decided not to use that one. Is there going to be a point, or like a point of no return, where you think, while our borders are not open and China's waiting for them to open, is there going to be a point where China's going to give up and say, well, stuff you, we'll go somewhere else? Yeah.
Again, I wish you'd asked an easier question.
Yeah, I don't do that.
I think that Chinese people are very patient. In some ways, they're very impatient, but in other ways, geez, they love to talk about their 5,000 years of history. And I think that it's just even if we're the last, that might make us more exclusive and more kind of, when you can't have something in China, you really want it, and that you see that with all these companies that launch VIP services that are just for a select few. And I think if New Zealand plays it well, even if we're not the first cab off the rank, then I think if we create it, make it exclusive, make sure people feel lucky to be here when they finally can, I don't think we'll just scare them all off. But I think tourism, and it's come up here a lot, there's so many positives that come from tourism and from education that you only need to look at the Daigou trade. And when Chinese come here, it is an aspirational destination. It's a long way for many Chinese. So they share it on social media, they create short videos of it, and that helps build that brand, New Zealand Inc. brand, with Chinese people. Their friends, family, colleagues are seeing these beautiful New Zealand food and beverage and landscapes. So when we do finally get Chinese back in here, I think it'll help all of our brands, not just the tourism operators in Queenstown and Matamata. I think it'll really benefit a lot of industries.
I think we've got time for just one more question. I don't think there's one there from the floor, so we'll go to this one, the top one on the screen here. China has seen a surge in consumers' interest in domestic brands that incorporate Chinese traditional style and culture. How can the New Zealand brands adapt to that?
Yeah, there's some things, and I think there's all sorts of trends, and China Skinny tries to give a lot of trends. I don't think you can be everything to everyone. I think a lot of foreign brands and luxury brands do it a lot. They try and have all these crazy, every Chinese New Year, you see all these Chinese elements thrown in there. Some of them pull it off. Some of them just get slammed on social media for just being so surface, so token, so faux. So it's a case of really selecting what we can do well. And there are some things like Chinese ingredients. It's understanding what some of these TCM type ingredients we can incorporate into our ingredients. But we really still need to retain what makes us special with trying to be something that if we're competing Chinese head to head, we'll get beaten every time. They can undercut us. They get the marketing better. They can make decisions quicker. So we need to retain what gives New Zealand a point of difference. But if we can, integrate some Chinese elements that are relevant and are more important. But we're not going to be able to please every Chinese consumer that wants to dress their pets in hand food kit and stuff. We need to really make sure that we just focus on a few things rather than trying to be everything to everyone.
Brilliant. I think there's been some fantastic advice there for New Zealand businesses. Can we give Mark a round of applause, please?
Thanks.